Hello, everyone. Welcome to Denver Human Services Kinship Provider Orientation. My name is Alexander Keel.
And my name is Sarah Boucher. The Child Welfare Division at DHS works to protect Denver's children and youth from harm by providing services and advocacy while also promoting family stability, respecting diversity, and working to strengthen family connections to community resources.
Let's start off with the agenda. During this training, it will take roughly about an hour. So at any point, if you need to take a break, please pause the video and come back when you're ready to do so. The best way to get a lot from this training is to have any questions you have written down, and during your first visit with your kinship worker, we'll be able to go through those questions with you. Also, during this training, it will be perfect to have your Kinship Orientation Handbook with you to follow along. And if you don't have that, it's okay. Let's go through with the training and then have your kinship provider give that to you. As your kinship worker, our goal is to work together with families and provide services to help keep families together. We want to support and build you up as you take placement of a child or sibling into your home. Our mission is to partner with our communities to protect those in harm's way and help all people in need.
So, as Alex mentioned earlier, we're going to be going over the Kinship Orientation Handbook. Some of the things we're going to talk about in that handbook is what is kinship, the child welfare involvement, what will be expected from you from the Department of Human Services, the different social worker roles, public benefits, policies, what you can and cannot consent to, self-care, how to deal with trauma in children, the certification process, and important school information to know.
What is kinship care? Well, kinship is anyone who establishes relationships with the child or family by maintaining family, cultural, and or community ties. Kinship care helps the child through the experiences of being out of their parents' home. Kinship care is the oldest form of family preservation and an important safety net for the children whose parents are either unavailable or unwilling to care for them. Kinship does not always mean a kinship giver is biologically related to the child. If you or another adult is caring full time for a relative or relative like child, you are providing kinship care.
Now let's talk a little bit about Red Team. Red Team stands for Review, Evaluate, and Direct. Red Team is a review team that meets daily to assess referrals. DHS receives a referral from our hotline. We then review it to determine if it meets the level of child endangerment per the law. A team of professionals, it's usually 3 to 5 social workers, supervisors, and managers, will discuss the case and if it meets criteria. If it does, it will be screened in to be further investigated. A decision will be made on how quickly an investigation should start. Teams will look at the information provided and examine if there is any prior history of concerns that have been reported. They will also analyze current cases and investigations, which enables the agency to recognize patterns, anomalies, and lessons that can help improve decisions, policies, and practices. A case will be opened as either voluntary or court involved. Voluntary means it is not court involved and there is no judge or court case. Once a case is opened, a child either remains in their home with their parents, is placed with kinship, or is placed into a foster home. If a social worker places a child with a kinship provider, a kinship worker, that's us, is assigned as a support to the kinship provider, that's you. The kinship worker is different than the social worker, and we'll get more in depth to that on the next slide. There's also 3 types of kinship care you should be aware of. There's private, voluntary, and formal. Private or informal kinship care is when there is no involvement with the courts or DHS. Voluntary is where the courts are not involved, but DHS is involved, and parents will often have to agree to this through a safety plan. And finally, there's formal kinship care. This is where the courts have ordered DHS to receive legal custody of a child.
From the top. By now, you probably have several new faces in your home as a kinship provider. We want to clarify what a kinship social worker role is and how is it different from an ongoing social worker. Our contact can be vary from month to month and is based off your needs as a provider. We cannot guarantee support each month, but we can assist with basic needs like clothing, hygiene items, and household expenses, and even do supportive services such as therapy and support group. We can also help with ongoing school support like tutoring and post-high school support. Something to note for the ongoing social worker role is that a social worker will work with the family on this for both court-involved and voluntary cases. The provider and the youth will each have a treatment plan and it is the method of addressing the needs of the families, such as making sure the child keeps appointments, attends school, or that the parents are displaying sober behaviors and engaging in services. Their contacts are each month face to face, and the contacts with the child must occur outside of the presence of the provider at least every other month. Contact should also occur where the child resides and should also include visual assessments of the child's living environment. To continue on with the ongoing child protection services, a case will start with the intake worker who will make the initial contact with the family and most likely place the child in your home. If this is the case is deemed necessary to remain open, the intake worker will eventually transfer the case to the ongoing worker. They are required to staff with the ongoing worker, inform placement about this change, as well as review safety plans in place and updated items.
Now let's talk about what to expect from DHS. Your biggest job is ensuring the children placed with you are safe, and you can check your handbook if you have any questions with that. There's also going to be different DHS workers and other professionals visiting your home at a minimum of once a month to see you and the child placed with you. They're required to visit with you and the child, and this is a federal requirement. Another thing to expect from us are family team meetings or permanency roundtables. These meetings ensure that all voices are heard and helps create the best protection plan for the child. An FTM or family team meeting occurs when issues arise regarding the placement and safety of a child, as well as on a regular basis. When a child is removed from their home or placed in a new home, if there are concerns of behaviors, when a case is closing, if a child moves placement, if a child returns home, or else they're required to be held every 90 days at a minimum. When we have these meetings, we have what are called the FTM facilitators, and they're the ones who oversee the meeting. Parents also attend, as well as their respective attorneys, any relatives, family members, the social worker, the kinship worker if you request them, the community advocate, or anyone the family sees as support can attend these meetings. When you attend these meetings as a kinship caregiver, you will be expected to provide an update on the child in the meeting. You're here to advocate for them and bring up concerns you may have or accomplishments that those kids have achieved. Parents can choose who they would like to attend their meetings, and you can be asked to leave after you give an update. Another expectation is visitation. Visitation is the child's right to have contact with their parents. You cannot deny a parent seeing their child. If you have concerns during a visit, you should always tell your social worker first. All direction about requirements of visitation will come from the primary social worker, and if you need clarification, you should call them. You should also note that parents have the right to see and visit with their children, even if they are incarcerated. This can include letters, visits, phone calls, and video calls. The social worker will speak with you about visitation, and if you're not sure about something, always ask them. It's always ultimately up to the social worker to determine visitation and what that needs to look like. You should also be aware that reporting abuse and neglect is required since you're now a mandatory reporter as a kinship provider. That means if you suspect abuse or neglect, you must report it to the hotline. Please note these phone numbers that we have on the PowerPoint and save those in case you need them for later. Another thing to be aware of are fingerprints. If a child in the home turns 18 while another child is in placement, they will also need fingerprints done. This is required by law. All adults over 18, even if not caring for the child directly, must get fingerprints. The child placed with you does not have to get fingerprints once they turn 18.
Next, let's understand the child welfare system with who are the main players in the courtroom. Starting off with court representatives, we have the city attorney, which represents Denver Human Services. We have the respondent parent attorney, which is the parent attorney, and they will each have their own. We have the guardian ad litem, which is the attorney for the child. You will hear us say GAL when we're referring to the guardian ad litem. Now, a dependency neglect petition and initial hearing is filed as scheduled with the court. From there, in case in which the child has been removed from their parents because the parent has been accused of child abuse, neglect, or abandonment, the following steps may follow. During the initial hearing, the judge or magistrate will decide who will have temporary custody for the children. Parents will be informed of what they are being accused of and what the concerns are. Next, a dispositional hearing is when the court will be adopting a new treatment plan and parents will be required by the court to participate in the treatment plan. Any updates to the court will be given regarding the case. Next, the permanency review hearings are updated regarding how the treatment plan is going and where the case is at, as well as how the children are doing in the case. These hearings will occur every 60 to 90 days until the case is ready to close. Now, in terms of a voluntary case, there are no court involvement, but there is a treatment plan. However, that treatment plan is voluntary. Next, let's talk about permanency. Permanency refers to a relationship that has a legal component that provides a child parent relationship, a legally permanent nurturing family for the child or youth. So, permanency goals are addressed at a permanency review hearing. Now, with the main goal of Denver Human Services, our main focus is always reunification. So, congruent planning is when you look at permanency planning with the other options. Goals can change over time as the case progresses. Factors to consider are regarding permanency options, and formal arrangements such as legal options for the court will be updated with the case. One of them will be APR, allocation of parental rights. So let's talk about that for a bit. APR is a legal option for permanency, and it is specifically appropriate in kinship care. Once APR is granted, there is no further involvement by the child's welfare agency, so DHS will fall back. In APR arrangements, the parent's parental rights are not terminated. Thus, the parent, grandparent, or other relative who have become the child's legal guardian will have physical and legal custody to act as a child parents and make decisions about the child, but the birth parents often retain some visitation or other rights. A parent can file for custody for 2 years if an APR is granted. Next, another option is RGAP, Relative Guardianship Assistant Program. You must be certified to receive RGAP. Once certification happens, this children must be in the home for a continuous 6 months in order to be eligible for RGAP. RGAP is APR with a certified foster home. You can receive financial assistance through RGAP. A parent can file a petition for having the children returned to them at any time. RGAP determines parental responsibilities as determined by a part of the RGAP order through the courts. Finally, the last step is adoption. Termination must occur before a relative can adopt. Relatives do not have to be certified kinship foster home in order to adopt. Anyone with a felony conviction involving a violent crime or child abuse conviction would not be able to adopt. If you are looking at adoption, the caseworker will assist you with the adoption process. Termination has to occur for both parents. Not one can be terminated while the other is not. Prior to the case going to the court for adoption, the caregiver will be required to meet with a negotiator. The monthly subsidized will be negotiated between the subsidized negotiator and you. Once all of the above is completed and a court date has been set, then the family will appear before a judge to finalize the adoption. Non-citizens cannot adopt or receive a subsidized payment. However, if they are related and wanting to adopt at least one person in the household, has to be a citizen or be a legal resident of the United States. If you have any questions or concerns about this when your family are at the adoption process, please contact your ongoing worker, your kinship worker, or the adoption supervisor at 720-944-6234.
Our goal at DHS is always reunification, and if that is not possible, we will look at other long-term options and we'll discuss those with you. That is why when we come to your home, we ask about you being a long-term option and what you would want that to look like legally if we're a court-involved case. One thing I want you to check in your handbook is the caregiving and parenting section. One thing to note is age and developmental stages and how they are guidelines for us and parameters for the children that we work with. As the kinship provider, you are the biggest advocate for the child or children in your home, and you should always mention any concerns about development or behavioral issues. Having this information on the developmental guidelines is necessary because the impact of a transition into a different home or placement on the child can show in various developmental stages. Another thing to note is safe sleep. Cribs should be free of all items. They should be sturdy and safe. The baby should always sleep alone in the crib on their back. You cannot sleep with a baby in a chair, on a couch, or in a recliner, or in your bed. If an infant is sleeping in a swing, a car seat, or a bouncer, they must be supervised at all times. Safe sleep is very important due to the many deaths we have attributed to co-sleeping. We're going to play a video for you at the end of this slide as well for you to review. Another policy we have is the prudent parenting standard. That standard is characterized by careful and sensible parental decisions that maintain the health, safety, and best interests of a child or young adult while encouraging emotional and developmental growth. We also have some rules from Title VII. This is a Colorado state rule. One thing to note about pools is all pools must be fenced and barriered, locked, and have a life-saving device in them, and a working pump and filter if it does not get drained. Wading pools must be emptied after each use, and hot tubs must have a lock on them. Another thing to note is smoking. No smoking of any kind is allowed in the child's presence. This includes e-cigarettes and vaping products. If you're going to be smoking, you must do it outside of the home. We also have specific requirements for your home. Some of those include an operating kitchen and a bathroom, and you must also have a CO2 detector in your home. There's also things to make note of regarding respite and alternative care. If a child is being watched for more than 8 hours by a provider or overnight, that care provider must be at least 18 years old and will need to be fingerprinted and complete CPR and first aid training. Your kinship worker can help with getting those set up. They must also consent to trails and sex offender checks through a general background check. They will need to provide copies of the caregiver provider's driver's license, insurance, and registration if a child or youth will be transported. 72 hours notice should be given to the caseworker and guardian ad litem prior to using substitute respite or alternative care unless an emergency exists.
Stated earlier, your kinship support worker will be able to help you with public benefits. As you can see here, there are a few options on the screen, so we will be able to talk about these with you in person during the first initial visits, so please have your questions ready and we'll go over these with you.
So once your kinship worker talks with you about public benefits, they'll ask you about how you want to apply for those benefits. You can do it one of two ways. You can either do it online or a paper application. If you have any questions about your form, you can always follow up with your kinship worker and they can walk you through how to fill that out appropriately. When we receive paper applications, as your kinship worker, we pass those along to our benefits specialists and they forward those to the appropriate county. Applications will only be forwarded to other counties for processing. Denver County cannot process the application if you do not reside in Denver County. If you do, we just give those to our benefits specialists and they help us with setting you up for getting your benefits started.
As you can see here, there are some basic resources on the screen, and as stated earlier, the kinship support worker, we can help you guys with clothing, general needs, and even catching up on bills. So have any questions, concerns, and worries ready for us during the initial visits, as we will be able to kind of tailor your needs around you, and we can look into resources for you. A lot of these resources can help you with a lot of different things, and most of the times we are able to find resources and community connections for you, the provider. Some resources require a referral form from us, and some are self-referral. So just let us know what you need, and we'll look into those.
All right, now let's talk about educational options and resources. First, let's talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act. Please always check in with the primary worker to registering the kinship child for school. It is assumed to be in the best interest of the child to remain in their school of origin or their home school, or to move up to the next designated school, such as middle school or high school if they're graduating. A bid meeting or a best interest determination meeting should be held by the primary worker in school or schools in order to determine the school location a child will attend and if the child will remain in their school of origin. Transportation should also be planned at that time, and you should be aware it can take a couple weeks for that to be put into place. If a child receives special education services, these services should remain in place regardless of where the child attends school. When a school change is necessary, the schools are legally required to enroll students immediately, even if they are lacking records from the previous school. The previous school district is required to send records within 5 days. Next, let's talk about free meals. Student in out-of-home care are categorically eligible for free meals if they were in the custody of the county or state for even 1 day. They're eligible for the entire school year and 30 days into the next school year. Next, let's talk about the right to fee waives and participation in extracurricular activities. Colorado statute states an education provider in which a student in out-of-home placement is enrolled shall waive all fees that would otherwise be assessed against the student, including but not limited to any general fees, fees for books, fees for lab, fees for participation in school or extracurricular activities, and fees for before school or after school programs. The education provider shall not limit the opportunity of a student in out-of-home placement to participate in school and extracurricular activities and before school and after school programs due to waiver participation fees. Now let's look at special education services. Some children require special services, such as an IEP or a 504 plan, or may already have special services in place. A kinship provider cannot legally approve special services, but they can participate in the meeting. DDHS has a designated person to establish an IEP for a child if the parents are unavailable to participate in a meeting. Finally, let's look at the Denver County ESSA program. This program is a support program that can help with a limited number of resources such as school supplies, clothing, food, etc. And it's for children where DDHS has custody and the student is attending a DPS school. This program is offered only during times when school is in session, and speak with your kinship worker to get some more information about how to do referrals.
Trauma in children is common when Denver Human Services gets involved. Removing a child from their home and parents will ensure some form of trauma. Children can act out in a lot of ways after going through grief and loss. It is important to focus on behaviors and action. Things to look out for are the children acting different after visits with their parents, children regressing in behaviors or throwing tantrums. This can throw your family into chaos and can be very difficult to deal with, but being patient will go a long way to build a strong relationship.
Now let's talk about the transition process and self-care. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be any good to the children that you've taken into your home. Self-care is very, very important to your role. You need to make sure you're sharing with your worker about any transitions or disruptions in the household that can happen, added anxieties or possible conflicts, not only between you and the child, but between other children in the home and the placed child. Your own children can become upset or develop problems as a result of a transition. An example would be the baby in the family is not the baby anymore after a new kid's been introduced. You should also work on trying to maintain a positive outlook. It can become very difficult for members of the family to see children that are placed with them in a positive light because children can act up and have a lot of behaviors in different homes. You or your spouse or your partner or you and your children may experience increased anxiety and conflict as you have placement of that child. Please look in your Kinship Orientation Handbook, and it talks a little bit more about emotional impacts. Trauma is something we talk about every day in child protection. Each removal and even being involved with child protection causes trauma. We want to lessen that exposure of our children we work alongside. Keeping them with kin is the biggest way that we can do that. You may also experience trauma taking placement of these children, and it's important to speak up for yourself if you need. Working towards being proactive rather than reactive can be the difference between a placement disruption and preserving a placement by getting them the supports they need in a timely fashion. You yourself will feel overwhelmed at times, even angry. And this is why it's so important to advocate for yourself and how the department can help you, especially to your social worker and your kinship worker.
What the department must consent to, or what must parents consent to. On the screen here, you'll see some examples of things that have to get signed off and get approved before they could be completed. Things such as out-of-state travel, religious ceremony, haircuts, immunization are some things that would need to get approved. If you have any concerns or questions, ask your ongoing worker or your kinship caseworker to get that process going. The sooner, the better. So things such as school testing, overnight outdoor school program, any kind of photography taken must get approved. Now, a term that you will hear is prudent parent standard. That term basically just means that you will raise a kid as if they were your own and provide a positive environment for them to grow in. It also allows the bio parents to still have control of their parenting style and what can and can't get approved through them as well. Kinship foster care, also known as formal kinship care or public kinship care, refers to the cases in which the children are placed in the legal custody of the state by a judge. And then the child welfare system then placed the children with their grandparents or other kin. On the next slide, we will break down more about the certification process and how to get that going.
Now we can talk a little bit about certification. Certification is when a non-certified kinship home becomes a certified kinship home. And in order to become a certified kinship home, you have to take 36 hours of pre-certification training. That's going to be about 12 3-hour sessions that are offered multiple times a week. You'll need 2 hours of the Safe Sleep online training. You'll have to participate in a safe home study. You will have to become CPR and first aid certified, and this needs to include child CPR and first aid. If you're in a 2-parent home, both people must complete the training together. Let's talk a little bit about eligibility. In order to be eligible for certification, you need to be at least 21. You must be a legal resident of the United States. A bio parent cannot be living in the home with the child. The case must be court involved or have an open court case. All adults 18 over must submit and pass a background check and a fingerprint check. And if you're legally married or separated, the spouse must consent to this happening. You should be aware that training classes for the pre-certification are offered virtually, and your caseworker can discuss that schedule with you. You will be required to fill out multiple forms, and you will also need to be aware that you're going to need references for certification. One can be a family member, and you're going to need 3 total. In these situations, the Child Welfare Agency, acting on behalf of the state, has legal custody and must answer to the court, but the kin may have physical custody of the child. Your kinship worker will meet with you monthly until you are able to get certified and will discuss all documentation that you need. They can also work with you on that documentation if you're not sure how to fill something out. Something to note, if you've received a founded for child abuse or have pending charges currently, you can lose eligibility for certification at any point in the process. You should also be aware that you do not need to become certified in order to adopt if that's something you're interested in.